Hello, dear audience. We are together again, and I'm very glad to be your guest. And we will be continuing our series of shows discussing very important, very key topics with Dr. Kyriaki. I don't want to say that she's our guest because she's our honored member anymore. So I want to just remind you that last 3 times we were speaking about humans who are created by the image and after the likeness of God. We looked at the human being from a point of view of theologian, of theology, of spirituality, and depicted the human being as a being that is carrying the image of God. Something more than we can see in everyday life, in our friends, in our brothers and sisters, in our relatives. And sometimes we even forget about it, and our relationship with our neighbors are not appropriate to a being that has that image of God. Like we remember Jesus Christ says, if you are not able to love your brother, how can you love God? In this topic we tried to enlighten that view that we have to look into our brothers and sisters as images of God. And then next time we spoke about the hearts who are seeking for God, which is, according to the Orthodox theology, in some respect placed into our hearts, that image is in our hearts. So human beings naturally, from the very beginning of the times, have been looking for some type of explanation for things that are above their imagination or their understanding. And their hearts have always been looking for God. They have expressed that seeking in different ways. They have made gods out of nature's forces or things that they haven't understood, but they have tried to find God. And finally, through our Lord Jesus Christ, the incarnate Logos who took human flesh, was the revelation to humanity who God is and that God is with us at all times. And then the third topic was about the providence, that all these things that are happening around us and we are going through are according to God's plan. And that's why we have the line in Lord's Prayer that is taught by Jesus Christ himself, that Lord's will be done. And he himself used several times in his life that, Father, take away this from me or do this, but your will be done. So providence is a very powerful force that is present in our lives. No matter what we do, things happen according to God's plan. We choose this way or the other way. In a long term, in a final statement, it's God's plan and it's according to His will. So remembering all about this, we will go to the next topic, which is the dark sides of the human being. We all know that humans are born as sinners, and there is nobody who does not have sin. And we read in the Old Testament and in the New Testament that the great prophets or holy people, saints, apply themselves so many sins, find so many failures in their lives, that definitely speaks about the human being having these dark corners, dark spots in their soul or in their heart. I don't want to give any false explanations. Now we'll have Dr. Kyriaki to give us spiritual and theologically correct explanations, because if we start looking for answers based on our logic, which cannot go any further than our daily lives, sometimes we may get wrong answers and we may deviate from the right path. So, Dr. Kyriaki, welcome, and please introduce us the importance of this topic first, if you would, and what part of the human life does this include in it? How often people face these darknesses that are in our souls or in our lives?
Thank you, Arkady.
You're welcome.
I'm happy to be with you today and with everyone today. When I was reflecting on today's topic, I tweaked the title for myself a little bit. It's exactly what you're saying. But for myself, I wrote in my notes to think about this in terms of darkness and the human heart.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's two types of darkness. Good darkness and not so good darkness, bad darkness. And so I think, first of all, that everything that is unknown and unknowable in the depths of the human being, some of it, of course, is beyond our reach, and it's not good, but much of it, most of it, is beyond our reach, and that's because it's made that way by the loving Creator who created us, the God the Father. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the two types of darkness that are in the heart. But since I'm not sure, for the people who are with us right now, if we're all on the same page regarding what the heart is, and I know 2 visits ago we talked about the heart a lot, I would like to start a little bit with a review on our understanding of the heart, from especially an Eastern Christian perspective, because that's the foundation from which we have to build. And I think most of us will know that the heart is the organ that beats in our chest, that has been talked about for centuries in romantic literature, in poetic literature, and because of that, I think most sensible adults will realize that the heart points to more than just romance, although it includes that, points to more than just sentimentality or the emotions, although it includes that, and emotions are important, and maybe we can get back to that later today or in a soon-to-happen future visit. So the heart is more than just the place where the emotions reside. It is, from a Christian perspective, at the core of who we are. It is that place within us where we choose the good. And last time we were together, we talked about that being, it's more than just the brain, it's more than just the intellect. It's a kind of mind that in some corners of Eastern Christian spirituality talk about the mind in the heart, which is a nice image to think about as a way to sort of describe this mystery, because all we can do is point to this mystery of what it means to be human. And so this kind of heart helps us choose the good or choose God. It is in some ways pre-verbal, before we can speak, and in some ways a quality that is meta-verbal, that is beyond speech. You said last time we were together that the heart is also a cosmic entity, and I went home thinking about that, and I was really moved by that, because first I thought about the heart of God, that of God's love for us, and that how it beats, so to speak, is with love for us and all of creation in ways we can't fathom. And then how each of our single little hearts, each one of us, how our little beats, how our hearts are called to beat back in love to God and one another. And how when we strive to do that, as hard as that can be, there are cosmic ramifications. I went home driving to Cape Cod from here after that, and it really struck me. And with that in mind, I want to say a little bit more about the heart, because it will set us up for our discussion in a more established way. And that when we talk about the heart, it is that place where we strive to stand in purity of heart. To be pure of heart is a stance where we stand before God without pretense and with complete honesty. And it's a kind of honesty that's radical. It's we are naked. We go with our hands open, our hands up in the presence of God. And so it is a kind of surrender to the love of God and to the reality that is beyond us. This kind of a stance is not for infants. It is a stance for those who can have the resolve to commit ourselves, one another, and our whole lives to Christ our God. This is one of the phrases that is repeated often in Eastern liturgies. And it is a mature stance. It is not for wimps. It is for grown-ups. It is also a stance of awareness and vulnerability. And so to approach God and one another with pure hearts, there's a kind of wise vulnerability that is with us at all times, being presented to each other and to the situations in which we bring ourselves, and also offering that to the love of God. Then the third dimension of that is it is a stance of innocence. Innocence here is not naivete, but it is that stance of radical openness and purity. And I'm using some words cyclically now because we're talking about a mystery of what it means to be in the presence of God as ourselves, as our fullest, most vulnerable and alive selves. That takes effort to cultivate. Why? Because our hearts are split. And that's why the topic today about talking about the darkness in the human heart. Some of that is good, some of that is not good. Christianity disagrees a lot about the depths of the human heart. There are some families within the Christian world that will say the heart is now utterly fallen and is worthless, and we wait for grace to rectify all of that. And that's not everybody, but that's some. The Eastern Christian perspective is more acknowledging the fall, acknowledging the brokenness, acknowledging, some would say even tainted or polluted waters now in which the heart is surrounded or which it is now infected by. Infected could be a good word, but it's not completely destroyed. That the love of God, being created in the image and after the likeness of God, is still there. And so the East has this more, I think, optimistic and at the same time realistic understanding of what the heart is about. And so I found just yesterday a quote from Saint Macarius of Egypt, who lived in the 4th century. He was an abbot of a monastery and a disciple of Saint Anthony the Great, who is known in the East and West as one of the
diamond of desert.
Right, the diamond of the desert, who's one of the founders of monasticism, all over the Christian monasticism as we know it today, all over the world. And so St. Macarius was very aware of these two dynamics occurring in the human heart. And he says this, now this is the 4th century, so I was really impressed with what he wrote. The heart itself is but a small vessel, yet dragons are there, and there are lions also. There are poisonous beasts, and all the treasures of evil. But there is too God, the angels, the life, and the kingdom, the light and the apostles, the heavenly cities and the treasuries of grace. All things are there.
It really is a universe. You use the term grown up. Sometimes we see grown up person but who acts like a child, or Christ himself says that bring these children to me because kingdom belongs to them. And Father, you hid things from the wise and showed them to the children. And I would like you to a little bit explain this, how people grow up. And also, there is a phenomenon that during the wars, children grow up faster. They mature faster. They become their mother's help if their father is not there. When they are maybe 7 or 8, they take care of the household. Or they may come up with grown-ups judgments, make decisions while they wouldn't make these kind of decisions in a peaceful environment. I assume, based on this example that I said, wars and stuff, children grow up, mature faster if their life is harder, I believe. They have more obstacles to go through and stuff. So please, if you would, give some more explanation about growing up. What do we mean when we say grown up spiritually?
Well, I'm writing some notes because I will never be able to remember all that. That what I would like to say, and I hope to honor some of the questions that you just asked. You talked about people behaving like children, and you mean that not in a good way.
Yes.
Because we were talking a minute ago about innocence, and this is not innocent from what you're saying.
It's childishness more.
Childish, and this is one of the conversations that we've had personally. I'm not sure here in the studio about the difference between childlike and childish. That the more we grow in innocence, and that I believe is the vocation of the Christian and persons striving to grow in truth, that innocence is one of the byproducts of what happens as we become more pure in heart, more transparent to whatever is transcendent about us and beyond us in our everyday lives, and in ways we don't understand. And so childishness is what you're referring to.
Mm-hmm.
And what's childishness? You know, when we know it, especially when we see children around 18 months old, 2 years old, 2.5 years old, going through what's called in America the terrible twos.
Mm-hmm.
Mine, 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 this is mine. Now, in psychology, that's also a very good thing, because that's often a time when a child, for the first time, is able to say, I am, and I am apart from you. And so, from a psychological perspective, they are experiencing their own sense of self or personhood. Mm-hmm. You can use that both as a psychologist and as a theologian. As a theologian, personhood is a gift that's been given to all humans, and it's something that grows, hopefully. That's if we're cultivating it. And so parents smile when the children start saying, it's mine, no, 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 because they're experiencing their personhood. And there's a lot of forgiveness there.
I was really worried about
No,
my
but
son. When he said, mine, 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 I was thinking it's such a bad thing that he's going through, and it's an exception.
But when we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond, saying mine, 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 then there's that childishness.
Mm-hmm.
But at age 2, and maybe a little beyond, and even into adolescence, as the child is learning more about what it means to be an I am, a person, in relationship with others, sometimes the way that they and we stumble into it is with the word no. No, no, no. In fact, my dad, God bless him, of blessed memory, that is something I didn't learn, or I didn't put 2 and 2 together till maybe a year and a half before the Lord took him. And his first stance, whenever I'd ask him anything or throw a new idea at him, would be no. No, no, no. But then I realized after a few weeks, you know, he'd be thinking about it, and then he would bring the issue up again, and his perspective would have changed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes he would say no because he would be caught off guard. And so he's asserting his personhood, making some separateness between him and me, so that I would get off his back and not
Give him time to think.
And give him time to think, because I would want, Daddy, you know, I want your answer now. And thankfully, he would come back and open it up again and say, well, I've been thinking about it some more, and this is what I think, you know. Or sometimes he'd admit he'd change his mind, but he really hated admitting that he changed his mind. My daddy, of blessed memory, who is smiling, I pray, in heaven right now, as we're talking. And so childlikeness is that mine. And the second we say mine in that way, we are, in that instant, turning our heart and our backs on God. Mm-hmm. At any age that we do that, when we grasp. The Buddhists talk about grasping. Mm-hmm. Okay, from the Christian perspective, that's a very good insight. And we would go even further and say it is turning our backs on God, on reality, on love. It's impossible to love. Agape love, the self-giving love, mm-hmm. the self-offering love. When we are saying mine, you know, we become smaller. We're focused on our own light.
Yes. Now, I remembered while you were bringing examples of the ascetics, when they say that if the young monk follows his own heart, don't let him. And now I kind of got the answer. But also when they refer or apply to God their prayers, they send their prayers to God, they bring it out from the depth of their hearts. So if you can specifically speak about the good part of the heart, how does that work? And the continuation of my question was, how do we grow up? I also remember from the seminary, one of our professors was speaking about spiritual fatherhood. And he was saying, well, there cannot be spiritual father forever. You have to grow up eventually. I didn't understand and I didn't accept his explanation, because in the lives of the ascetics again, I think it's Basil the Great or Anthony, when they gave instructions to their students, after everybody was satisfied, they released them, but they kept the weakest one, and then they confessed to this student and asked them suggestions, because that's how the spiritual life is. You cannot learn about yourself. You have to hear it from somebody else. And they bring the example of the medicine and the sick person. The sick person does not want to take medicine unless it's prescribed by the doctor. Even though you know that this is your medicine, you won't take it until the doctor says you have to take it. So they gave this honor of being a doctor to their students because there was nobody else above them, so they gave somebody below them to become their teacher or their father. So now what I find important is to show our audience, to help them to find out the darkness in their heart and how to get rid of the darkness, how to work out the light and make it...
Well, there's two types of darkness. There's good darkness and bad darkness. And so I think the darkness you're referring to is the kind of darkness that the mind part, when we are making self-centered, selfish choices that cut us off from the author of love, the God who created us, and one another and creation. And so what you're talking about is the types of desires that we have in our hearts. Now, the Greek word for desire and the Latin word, the ancient patristic Latin word for desire, when it's holy desire, when it's the kind that comes from beyond, that's true to who we are, and whoever that might be, both have the same meaning. And that is the desire that is put into the heart of that individual person by God the Father himself. Which is interesting, both the Greek and the Latin point to that. And so it's important to be listening to what our hearts are telling us. But it's also important, and so that's the good darkness, because we don't know what that really means. We just have a sense. Sometimes we know exactly what it means, but 90% of the time in my life, I have a sense or a direction, or everything else doesn't fit, but this is the direction, and I guess I have to go this way, even though I don't know where it's leading. And so this may be more a result of listening for the holy desire, which is coming from beyond me, but it feels like me because it was planted in me, planted in you, and planted in everyone, that needs to be listened to. At the same time, because we live in a fallen world, because we are still also fallen, there are desires that still echo from the fall, that echo from those parts that are selfish. Mine, 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 mine. So that's why listening is very important. Is it the mine, and mine that cuts me off from authentic communion with God, one another, and others, and creation? Or is it something that is leading me to more life? And sometimes we don't know that. We need time. We can tell by the fruits, so to speak. So that's a very important distinction in following the heart, that there is the mine, and then there's the response to something beyond us that we can't explain, that really feels like it's part of us that we have to attend to. And that takes a lot of listening and discerning, and you mentioned spiritual direction. And it is good to have someone to share this spiritually. And I would encourage people to pray about and start seeking peacefully, not in a neurotic way or in a way that's anxious, that just a desire to seek this kind of help is the first step, or is a new step. And God knows us from the inside out, and so to peacefully search from there. There's also some writings from the ancient church that talk about what do you do instead, or while you're waiting for the right person to show up. And some of the advice, and I'm thinking of St. Dorotheos of Gaza gave advice saying, well, when you don't have the right person, it's okay to have to seek the advice of a small number, and he said small number, 3, 4, 5 people, maybe 6, I forget, of people you respect, whom you would pour your whole heart out to and receive their advice. So in a sense, and he was very strict, he said, do not open your heart a little bit to one person and a little bit to another person and a little bit to another person, or parts of yourself here or to another person there. In some ways, he was kind of pointing to what psychology today would call splitting. You don't want to split parts of yourself to people. Saint Dorotheos would say, you share your whole heart to these people, your whole self, warts and all, good, bad and all, and see what they say. But that's in a sense harder,
Yes.
you know, to share yourself with a few people with whom you trust than with one person. So that's interesting. But that's also helpful for those of us in process.
Yeah, another approach I have met is that in a small booklet I read about spiritual fatherhood, that spiritual father has to be this and that and that and that and that, and then eventually the author says that according to these explanations, as you see, a spiritual father has to be perfect, but you're not going to find anybody like that around you. And what he says is, when you trust somebody, God blesses that person. And even if you go to the fullest person, which I don't suggest to do, but if you trust 100% and open your heart, you, through your trust, you give that person a responsibility. And then, based on that responsibility, God blesses him, gives him the answer to you through that person.
That's beautiful.
Yes, and this is a very painful point or thing for me, because in the Armenian Church, this relationship has disappeared because of the Soviets or other components in the church. There is no pure relationship between a father and a student where you can go and open your heart and tell everything. They are trying to build this relationship, but it's really hard when it's destroyed to build trust, 100% trust.
That because both what you're saying now about the current pastoral challenges of the Armenian Church, and what you were saying earlier, the story about the abbots, the holy abbots that would send the holy monks away and keep the youngest or the least to confess to. It says something very, very important that on a spiritual level we need to pay attention to. And I can even address it a little bit psychologically. Remind me in a minute about that. But the spiritual part is the level of trustworthiness. That if the other person is engaging you, like if the abbot were to discern those young monks who maybe he knew spiritually were still learning from him, but could tell that they were honest souls, striving to grow in the truth of God, of loving God, and that they would respond with innocence and love in return, with goodwill, and no contriving, no manipulation, no manipulation.
That's
no manipulation, okay? Miracles happen. And so, and yes, I bet both of us have been touched by people who may not know the Orthodox spiritual tradition very well, but because they are dealing with us with a pure heart for some reason or other, and there's no manipulation in the encounter between us, something extraordinary happens. I bet this has happened to you in the past, and I know it's happened to me. And so this is also telling that when we open our hearts, when we do not approach one another with contrivance, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, or an agenda, but truly open-hearted and open-minded in the presence of God, vulnerable, astounding things can happen. And we can be changed forever.
I find that pride has to be part of that not very good darkness of our heart.
That's the first thing I wrote down for the depths within us. I wrote the scary depths part 1, which is the part of us that is grounded in God and we don't know it, and those depths lead us to God, and those depths, the mystery of who we are in the presence of God that only God knows, that's the good side, but that's scary too, because in our intellect, in our fallen human finiteness, we're made for immortality, and it doesn't make experientially sense, and so that's scary. Okay, but it's good scary, but it's still scary. Then there's the bad scary, the parts of us that are fallen and have been deluded by the fall of Adam and Eve. And so the fall of Adam and Eve, at least in Orthodox spiritual understanding, is when Adam and Eve chose to be God without God. That's what the story of reaching for the apple. And to try to be God without God wanted to share himself with Adam and Eve, meaning all of humanity, so that we would be co-heirs with God. We would be gods, small g, with God, in the way that he was leading us and asking us to grow in the way which we were created. When Adam and Eve tried to take the shortcut without God, that's basically what the apple was, to take a shortcut. They were trying to be God without God. Have I said that enough? Trying to be God without God, which is the Orthodox definition of pride. So the original sin, pride, is that mine, the desire to be God without God. It's all about me. And that's antithetical to love.
Once I heard very deep explanation about pride. It said that the pride is such a bad sin that it can even dwell into humility. It can live inside of humility. And the explanation was, if we think that we are the most humble one, then the pride is right there. When I think that I'm the humblest one, I'm already proud
I
of
love
my
that.
humility.
It's so easy to fall.
Yes, and what I would like our audience to hear is how is it that we're proud of something, or proud of our children, proud of our job, proud of our car and stuff, and we refer that to the heart. My heart is proud.
Well, this is what I tell my friends. When we say, I'm proud of my kids, I'm proud of my brothers and sisters, I'm proud of whatever, do we have gratitude in our hearts? Because to be grateful, Eucharistia in Greek, right? To be great, Eucharistia is another word for the term liturgy. It is Eucharistia. The divine liturgy in Greek is the great gratitude, in a sense. You could call it that if you want. And so to be a grateful person is to be a person who is always humble, because we cannot be grateful without surrender. We cannot be grateful without our hands open and empty and naked in the presence of God. And so when we say, I'm full of pride, there can be healthy pride in the sense of acknowledging the good, being overwhelmed with the good, being moved by the good, celebrating the good, and it needs to be brought back to gratitude to the loving God who made all of this possible. And so when that's happening, that's humble. We can be celebratory. We can even say, this is wonderful, this is fabulous, and celebrate, and it can be still rooted in humility. And we have to be watchful, because it's so easy to go from being grateful to it's all about us. And we can, instead of being grateful, we can get high. We don't need alcohol and drugs to get high. We can get high on our own grandiosity. We can get high off of our own sense of entitlement. We can get high on our delusions of grandeur. And so that's all part of, those are all offsprings, springing off from pride, the delusional pride, the sinful pride.
And from the pride comes selfishness, I would assume. And I have heard this explanation about selfishness, that selfishness can be good sometimes. And the explanation is this, that if we don't know how to love ourselves, which says selfishness in reality is love towards your own self, you cannot love others. If you cannot love others, you cannot love God. So in some respect, selfishness is justified to say that if you do not know how to love yourself, you cannot love God, and you cannot love your neighbors. From psychological perspective, I would like you to give some answers to this, because the person who was explaining is a philosopher and probably knows some of different religions and psychology. I think Erich Fromm has spoken about this too, and he even goes to the Christianity and explains through the quotations from the New Testament saying, love your neighbor like yourself, meaning you have to love yourself first. You have to learn loving yourself, and then you can know what love is, and then you can love your neighbor.
Well, he wasn't the first to say these things, and so I would say when selfishness is healthy or holy, it's not selfish. It's care for self.
Okay.
All right? There's a difference between being selfish and expressing authentic, life-giving, genuine care for self, as that we are all created by the loving God, as we are God's children. And God doesn't make junk, I once heard on the television, some preachers say, and that is very true. And so we do not treat the gift of life that He's given us, even in our own selves, lightly. And so the gift of love that is shown to us on a daily basis just by our existence by God needs to be treated with respect and appreciation. So we do have to express tender self-care. So care for self is different than selfishness. Right?
Okay.
And so I've got two readings right here going back to the early church that talk just about this. So St. Macarius of the 4th century, again, who I cited earlier, says this about the dignity with which we were created. He says, "Look how mighty are the heavens and the earth, the sun and the moon. But it is not in these that the Lord rested. The human person, therefore, is of more value than all creatures, and I dare say he is more valuable than any creature, visible or invisible, more valuable than the ministering angels. When God said, 'Let us make man in our image and after our likeness,' He was not speaking of the archangels Michael and Gabriel. He was speaking about the spiritual substance of the human person, his immortal soul." And in the same time frame, maybe a little bit later, I would say mid-5th century, St. Peter Chrysologus of Ravenna, which is now in a city it's still standing with many beautiful monuments in Italy. And it says something very similar. He says, "Why people, why you who are so precious to God, are you so worthless in your own eyes? Why render yourself such dishonor when you are honored by Him? He made you in His image that you might in your person make the invisible Creator present on earth. He has made you His envoy so that the vast expanse of the earth might have the Lord's representative. Then in His mercy, God assumed what He made in you. He wanted now to be truly manifest in you, just as He had wished to be revealed in humankind as in an image. The fact that the Creator is in His creature and that God is in the flesh brings dignity to you, without dishonor to Him who made you."
That's beautiful, and I would say that it has a lot of input into modern psychology, which will help people to come to self-realization and come out of their wrong ways and realize that. And now I remembered Anthony Bloom's words about when he speaks about the soul, the spirit, and the body. He says we sometimes look at our bodies as the failure, the part of our being that is causing the trouble all the time. But in reality, our bodies are the sacrifice. They have suffered, the body has suffered the faults that has happened with our soul. Our soul has separated himself from God and from our spirit, and the body has suffered with sicknesses, with diseases, with all kinds of sufferings. And the same way I understood what, if it is correct, please say, if not, correct me, that if we love and care about ourselves, then we find our real value, and then we have to take care of that precious value and
care for self, not selfishness. Yes. And there's a difference. And so, but when we're asking God, you know, or being open to the love of God in how we take care of ourselves, take care of our health, take care of our rest, take care of you know, how much time we spend connecting with others, how much time we spend privately so that we can be restored. Mm-hmm. This is all giving honor back to God. And so, so that this is healthy care for self. And so we're going back and forth, even in our conversations, I'm noticing, Arhadi, that there is healthy care for self, and there's unhealthy care for self, which is selfishness. Like we become an idol for our own selves. Or when we talk about we're going into our own inner spaces, either when we meditate on our, Kallistos Ware, Bishop Kallistos Ware, a theologian and spiritual leader of the Orthodox Church, would say often that in the Orthodox tradition, all real prayer is an expression of meditation. Mm-hmm. But not all meditation may be prayer. Okay.
Interesting.
So that was very helpful for me in learning about that, because it pointed to something that Anthony Bloom has also been talking about, and I found that just in time for our time being together, where he talks about each person's spiritual journey. He says this regarding the spiritual journey: it is not a journey into our own inwardness, meaning inwardness per se. Mm-hmm. It is a journey through my own self, in order to emerge from the deepest self into a place where He, that is God, where He is, the point at which God and I meet.
Now I remember when I was young, I met this gentleman who was speaking about spiritual things, and before that I had tried to fast. Mm-hmm. One day in the week not to eat anything, and I never succeeded. I was always failed. After 12 o'clock I couldn't stand it anymore. And I remember that day when 4 or 5 kids visited him and he started talking about spiritual things. All of a sudden I realized it was 5 o'clock already and I hadn't eaten anything, and that was my fasting day. So this is a food that I hope that our audience are enjoying. And it's so wonderful, we can keep going and on and on. I have several points that I would like to ask immediately now, but I don't want to, and we'll continue next time. Thank you for your time and energy and effort. I see that you have done great research there to give good answers to our audience. And I don't want to say thank you because God will thank you, and because you're doing His work. And I feel myself, I'm doing something I'm supposed to be doing. It's not like I'm doing a favor to anybody, but I'm doing what I'm called to do. And I believe it's the same way with you, and our audience need this. Thank you very much. And to the staff of the studio that patiently and with great love make these programs possible. Thank you, dear audience, for being with us. Have a good day.